No one warns you that doing the right thing can still cost you everything you built. I didn't understand that all at once. It arrived the way most hard truths do in pieces. In small inconsistencies, I kept finding reasons to excuse, because I was 63 years old, twice divorced, and for the first time in a decade, genuinely happy. Her name was Rosalind, and for 16 months I believed she was the last good thing life still owed me, but I'm getting ahead of myself. For those of you just joining me, my name is Walter Kowalczyk. Friends, family, folks watching, I consider you family too, call me Walt. I spent 38 years running a fourth-generation furniture restoration business here in the Polish Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh. The kind of trade my grandfather brought over from Krakow and my father built into something real. We're not wealthy in the flashy sense. We're wealthy in the way that matters: a full table every Sunday, a name people trust, a church we've attended for 4 generations. My family is loud, Catholic, and stubborn about tradition. Sunday dinner at my sister Danuda's house isn't optional, it's closer to a covenant. My late wife, Irene, God rest her, used to say you could set a clock by our family's need to feed people. I raised 2 sons in that house, buried Irene from it 5 years ago. And I never expected, at 63, to feel my chest tighten the way it did the night I met Rosalind Hart at a charity dinner for the Veterans Hospital downtown. She wasn't young, 51, sharp, funny in a way that caught me off guard. She laughed at my terrible joke about walnut veneer within 5 minutes of meeting me, then turned to my sister and asked genuinely, not out of politeness, for the recipe for her pierogi. Danuta grabbed her by the arm and talked to her for 40 minutes straight. I stood there watching and thought, ah, so this is how it happens, even now, even at my age. We dated for 16 months. She came to Sunday dinner by month 2. By month 4, she knew which chair belonged to my brother-in-law's stash and never once sat in it. My family folded her in without hesitation, the way Polish families do, with suspicion first, and then with food, and then, eventually, with love. I proposed to her on the overlook at Mount Washington, the whole city lit up behind her on a Thursday evening in early autumn. Ring, the works. She said yes before I finished the sentence. My sister cried when I called her. My youngest son said, "Good. Now bring her to dinner, so Aunt Danuta can feed her right." I had no idea what she was already planning. Welcome back to the channel, my friend. Settle in, because this one's going to take you somewhere. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one of them, and I promise you, this story earns your time. Here's what I need you to understand about Rosalind before anything else. She wasn't cold. She wasn't guarded in the way you'd expect from someone hiding something. She was warm, quick with affection, and she made me feel, at an age when a man starts to think that chapter of his life is closed, like I still had one more good story left in me. So, when the subject of her family came up, and it came up early, because in my world, family comes up immediately, her answer didn't strike me as a warning sign. It struck me as a wound. "My parents and I aren't close," she told me one night, about 7 weeks in. We were on the couch in her condo in Shadyside, takeout containers going cold on the coffee table, neither one of us looking at the other. They were difficult people when I was young. Rigid, judgmental, especially my father. I had to put real distance between us just to become who I am. I looked at her. She wasn't performing. Her eyes were fixed somewhere past me, tired in the specific way of someone recalling something processed long ago, but saying it out loud still cost her something. "I'm sorry," I said. "What else is there to say?" "It's fine. I just don't talk about it much. They won't be at the wedding. I need you to understand that." I told her it didn't matter to me, and I meant it, because I trusted her. She'd given me no reason not to. What I hadn't fully accounted for was my family. Not that they were hostile toward Rosalind, they adored her, plainly. But the Kowalczyk family runs on a specific frequency, and that frequency includes a deep need to know the people connected to the people we love. It isn't judgment. It's just belief you understand a person better once you know where they came from, who raised them, whose table they sat at as a child. By the 14th month of our engagement, the silence around Rosalind's family had started making its own kind of noise. It came to a head on a Sunday night in late July. Danuta had made golabki, the real kind, the kind that takes most of Saturday to prepare. We were all around the table, me, Rosalind, Danuta, Stash, my two sons, my nephew Marek, and his wife. Everything was normal until Stash, who has never once in his life considered the social temperature of a room before speaking, set down his fork and looked at Rosalind. Rosalind, honey, I gotta ask you something. She smiled. Sure, Stash. Where's your people at? The table went quiet the way it does when someone says the thing everyone's been carefully avoiding. Rosalind's smile stayed fixed, but her eyes flickered, just slightly. My parents and I don't have contact. I've mentioned that. I know you mentioned it. I'm asking about it. Stash wasn't being cruel. He was being Stash. Because in our family, and I say this with love, you don't marry into a family you've never met. It isn't how we do things. Stash, my sister's voice. One low word. Stash picked his fork back up. But the question was already on the table, and no amount of Golabki was going to bury it. Later, after Rosalind had gone home, my son Michael found me in Danuta's kitchen. He poured himself a glass of the good vodka and leaned against the counter. She's a good woman, he said. Not a question. She is. I believe her. He nodded slowly. But Dad, we're going to be standing in a church. We're going to make promises in front of God and everyone we know. And we're going to do it without ever meeting a single one of her family. Her parents were difficult, Michael. I understand. I believe her. He set his glass down. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm asking you to know what you're walking into. I didn't say anything. He patted my shoulder and went back to the dining room. I stood in that kitchen a long time after that. But here's what I need you to understand. I still wasn't suspicious. Not of Rosalind. If anything, I was worried about myself. Because the thought I couldn't shake, the one that kept surfacing on the drive back across the bridge into the city, was this. What if her parents took one look at me and decided I wasn't what they wanted for their daughter? I know how that sounds coming from a man who owns a business and has a family like mine. But Rosalind moved in a very specific world marketing executives, gallery openings downtown, the kind of social circle where everyone has opinions about single origin coffee. Her condo looked like something out of a magazine. Her friends wore labels I had to look up. She carried herself with a particular polish that I found attractive, but that, quietly, sometimes made me feel like an old workhorse, too loud, too ethnic, too close to Stash. What if her parents were the same? What if they had money and standards and expectations I couldn't meet? What if they met me and Rosalind saw everything through their eyes, and something shifted? That was my real fear. Driving north on Route 8 the following Saturday morning, it wasn't that I expected to uncover a lie. It wasn't that I thought anything was wrong. I thought I was going to meet intimidating people who might decide I wasn't good enough. I was going to show up, take whatever they gave me, and try to convince them I was the man their daughter had chosen. Honestly, I thought I was the underdog in this story. Finding her parents hadn't required a private investigator. It had required a tedious piece of paperwork. In the 15th month of our relationship, Rosalind had moved into a rental property my business partly owns downtown, one of the buildings we'd restored years back and still held a stake in. Since we were marrying in a matter of weeks, our accountant needed her to formally sign the long-term lease documentation for tax purposes. It was sitting on my desk on a Friday afternoon when my office manager dropped off the processed paperwork. I looked down at the identification she'd uploaded to the portal. Rosalind Marie Hart, not Ashcombe, the name she used on social media, the name she'd introduced to my friends. Hart. Out of pure curiosity, I ran a quick property record search under that name. A few clicks later, I found an old public record, a dormant Facebook profile untouched since college, and a listed address on Larkspur Lane in Butler, Pennsylvania, about an hour north. The following Saturday, I told Rosalind I had a property inspection scheduled. She kissed me goodbye, without looking up from her laptop. The whole drive up Route 8, I ran through introductions in my head, quietly dreading the moment someone opened a door and looked at me like I wasn't what they'd pictured. I came off the highway into Butler just before 10 in the morning. I followed the GPS into a neighborhood of modest, well-kept ranch houses, clean streets, American flags on porches, the kind of block where people know their neighbors by name and wave from their driveways. I slowed down. There it was, a tidy little house with a flower bed running along the walkway and a wind chime on the porch. And in the front yard, moving slowly with a garden hose, was an older man in a faded Steelers t-shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, watering the flowers with the unhurried patience of a man with nowhere else to be. This isn't what I pictured. I sat in the car a full 5 minutes, recalibrating everything. No gate, no luxury car in the driveway. Nothing to suggest the people living in this house had spent one single moment worrying about whether someone else was good enough for anything. These weren't intimidating people. These were ordinary, decent people. And for one unmistakable moment, I felt real relief. I got out and walked up the path. He saw me when I was about 10 feet away and narrowed his eyes with that careful look people get when a stranger approaches. "Can I help you with something?" I stopped, took a breath. "Sir, you don't know me. My name is Walter Kowalczyk. I'm engaged to your daughter, Rosalind." Frank Hart let go of the hose, not dropped it clumsily, just let it go. Water ran slowly down the driveway while he stared at me, and his face did something I wasn't prepared for at all. It broke. Not with anger, not with suspicion, with relief. 2 years of accumulated grief, finally finding somewhere to land. "Peggy." His voice cracked on the name. "Peggy, come out here." And in that exact moment, standing at the entrance of a house on Larkspur Lane, watching a retired mailman try to hold himself together, my understanding of the entire situation turned over completely. Inside the Hart house, everything I thought I knew about Rosalind began to come apart, quietly, methodically, while I drank coffee I hadn't asked for and ate cookies Peggy served me with trembling hands. The house was clean and modest and completely full of Rosalind. School photos, a prom picture, a college graduation portrait on the mantel where Frank and Peggy stood on either side of her, beaming. Frank had his arm around her shoulders. Peggy's face was so proud it was almost hard to look at. These were not the faces of abusive people. These were the faces of parents who missed their daughter. The story unfolded carefully. Frank had spent 32 years as a mail carrier before retiring. Peggy had worked as a school secretary in the Butler School District for most of Rosalind's childhood. They'd put her through Penn State full scholarship, no debt to her parents. And they were proud of that, deeply proud. When Rosalind moved to the city and started building her career in marketing, things had changed slowly. Calls got shorter. Visits stopped. She started appearing in photos online under a different name, Ashcombe. Her middle name at events with people Frank and Peggy didn't recognize. Wearing a version of herself they didn't fully recognize either. Then came the conversation about the wedding, the request for $80,000. Frank's counteroffer, heavy with disappointment, of $12,000 everything they could give without gutting their retirement. Rosalind's response had been, "If you can't invest in my future, you're not part of it," blocked that same night. Peggy slid something across the table, a sealed birthday card, unopened, stamped, and returned to sender in red. Rosalind's handwriting on the return address label. Their address. I stared at the red stamp on that envelope, then slowly pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the text Rosalind had sent me the night before. The one I'd read right before falling asleep. The one that had prompted this whole trip in the first place. "Sweetheart, wonderful news. I reached out to my parents. They finally apologized for everything and want to have lunch with you before their trip. I'm so excited for you to finally meet them." The kitchen went very quiet. I looked up slowly. Frank and Peggy Hart sat right across from me, completely unaware of the digital reality their daughter was constructing in real time. I turned the phone around and showed them the screen. Peggy read it. She set the phone down gently and said nothing. Frank looked out the kitchen window at the flower bed he'd been watering when I pulled up. I thought about the drive up, my rehearsed introductions, my quiet fear of not being good enough for these people. I almost laughed. Because I'd spent weeks worrying that Rosalind's parents would look down on me, that they'd be too refined, too wealthy, too demanding. And here they were in Butler, on Larkspur Lane, with wind chimes and a garden hose and 2 years of unopened birthday cards. The person who'd decided someone wasn't good enough hadn't been them. It had been her. It had always been her. And just like that, the man who'd driven up Route 8 nervous about making a good impression, that man was gone. The man who drove back into the city that afternoon was thinking about something entirely different. The difference between a good liar and an excellent one is that the excellent one never breaks character. Not even at the table, not even while everything is falling apart. I didn't confront her that night. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. I got back to our garage downtown a little after 2 in the afternoon, sat in my car for a full 10 minutes, and made a very deliberate decision. Not yet. Not because I was afraid. Not because I doubted what I'd just seen and heard in that kitchen in Butler, but because I'm my father's son. And my father taught me something about timing right before a confrontation that most people misunderstand. He used to say, Walt, the one who reacts first almost never wins. Let them finish the lie. A half-told lie is just an argument. A fully told lie is a confession. I rode the elevator up to our floor and stood outside the door a moment. I could hear Rosalind inside, moving to the low sound of the television, completely unbothered, completely unaware of any of it. I put my key in the lock and went in. She was on the couch with a glass of white wine, and her laptop open to a venue website. She looked up and smiled the way she always did, warm, easy, like I was the best part of her day. How was the inspection? Promising, I said. Long drive, though. You look tired. Want me to order something? I want you to explain why your mother's birthday card is sitting in a drawer in Butler with our return address stamped and unopened. That's what I wanted. Whatever you're in the mood for, I said. I sat down beside her. She rested her head briefly on my shoulder and went back to looking at venue photos. I looked at the screen and saw nothing at all. On the outside, completely normal. On the inside, I was taking the whole thing apart, piece by piece. That night I lay awake in the dark and did what I do when I'm working through something complicated. I separated what I knew from what I assumed and built a timeline. As far as I knew, Rosalind's real name was Hart. Her parents were Frank and Peggy Hart of Butler, Pennsylvania. Alive, present, and heartbroken. They hadn't abused her. They hadn't been controlling or toxic in any sense that anything in that house suggested. They'd offered her $12,000 for the wedding, been told it wasn't enough, and been erased that same night. As far as I knew, Rosalind had texted me while sitting in her parents' kitchen, telling me those same parents had apologized and wanted to meet me for lunch, which meant she was already building the next floor of the lie, which meant there was a next floor, which meant there was someone she planned to bring to that lunch. Who? That was the question I was trying to answer before I fell asleep. I didn't have to wait long. Over the next 3 days, I paid attention differently. Not suspiciously, I was careful about that. I didn't check her phone. I didn't follow her. I just listened. The way you listen once you finally understand that every conversation has been happening on 2 levels simultaneously, and you'd only ever been hearing one of them. I noticed she'd started mentioning her boss more than usual, a man named Gerald Whitfield. Gerald thinks, informally, the Sinclair account might close soon. Marjorie Whitfield was actually at that same benefit gala. Small world. Small mentions, nothing alarming, the kind of thing a person drops into conversation when they're trying to get someone familiar with a name before that name becomes important. She was getting me used to them. She'd been doing it for weeks, and I'd never noticed. Gerald Whitfield. I looked him up from my office the following Tuesday morning. Door closed. Senior Vice President at Rosalind's firm, a wealth management company headquartered downtown. His photo on the company website showed a man in his late 50s, silver-haired, with that particular ease that only comes from decades of never having to justify yourself anywhere. His wife, Marjorie, turned up in a society column about a charity gala 2 years earlier. Polished hair, highlights, the complete picture. A wealthy, respectable couple. Exactly the kind of people you'd want at your side if you were trying to convince a traditional Polish Catholic family that you came from somewhere impressive. I sat back in my chair and stared at the Whitfield's corporate photo. That's when it hit me, Rosalind wasn't just a liar. She was trapped inside a prison of her own enormous insecurity. She'd spent a decade reinventing herself in the city, reshaping her identity to climb a social ladder that my family had never cared about, but that her business world friends absolutely did. When her father refused to sacrifice his retirement for 1 day of theater, it wasn't just a financial disagreement to her. In her mind, his modesty threatened the polished illusion of wealth she'd built her whole self around. To keep the lie alive, she hadn't just distanced herself from them, she'd had to erase them completely. I thought about what she must have told the Whitfields to get them to agree to this. Because, here's what I know about people like Gerald and Marjorie Whitfield, they didn't get where they are by being careless or foolish. For Rosalind to get them to sit at a table and pose as her parents, She must have given them something that made sense. A coherent story. Something moving enough that two busy, important people would say yes without asking too many questions. What had she told them? I let it sit for 2 days, and Thursday morning my phone buzzed with a reminder Rosalind had added to our shared calendar. Lunch, Gerald and Marjorie, at the Grandview Saloon. Saturday, 12:30 p.m., she'd added a note underneath. Can't wait for you to finally meet them, sweetheart. This means everything to me. I stared at that note for a long while. Means everything to me. I thought about Peggy Hart pressing a sealed birthday card across her kitchen table. I thought about Frank Hart's face when he read that text over my shoulder. Yeah, I bet it does. That same Thursday, I called my son Michael from my car, engine running, parked in the garage below our building. He answered on the second ring. I need to talk to you. Come to the house. 20 minutes later, I was sitting at Danuda's kitchen table, the same table where Rosalind had charmed my sister, where Stash had asked his question, where everything had seemed completely normal 2 weeks earlier. And I explained all of it, every piece. Butler, Frank and Peggy, the birthday card, the text, Gerald and Marjorie Whitfield. My son sat across from me with his hands folded and listened without interrupting once. When I finished, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need?" 3 words. That was it. No lecture. No I told you so. No dramatic reaction. I need to get into that lunch, I said. I need to build something bigger. He nodded slowly. And the Hearts? I'm going back to Butler after the lunch. I want to know if they're willing to be part of what comes next. He looked at me steady. And what comes next? A dinner, I said. A real one. The right people in the room. Another pause. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and said, I'll talk to Aunt Danuta about the restaurant. That was the whole conversation. My sister's reaction was somewhat less contained. She came into the kitchen from the living room, where she'd apparently been listening to the entire thing, which in our house doesn't count as eavesdropping. It counts as being present. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, and an expression I can only describe as the specific fury of a Polish woman who has fed someone her golubki and been lied to in return. That woman ate at my table, Danuta said, and her mother is sitting in Butler with a birthday card that came back unopened. I know, Danusha. I know these poor people already, in my heart. Walter. She stared at me a long moment. Then she crossed the room and put both hands on my face, the same move she's made since I was 4 years old and wanted her full attention. You're going to fix it, she said quietly. Not just for you. For them too. Saturday came. The Grandview Saloon downtown is the kind of old money place where the lighting is designed to make everyone look a little more important than they actually are. Rosalind had made the reservation. As expected, I arrived 5 minutes early and sat facing the door. They came in together, Rosalind in the middle, one hand tucked into Gerald Whitfield's arm, Marjorie on her other side. Rosalind was radiant. Gerald moved with the ease of a man who'd never once questioned whether he belonged anywhere. Marjorie was all polished smiles and careful posture. I stood when they reached the table. Big smile, firm handshake. Mom, Rosalind said, her voice tinted with a particular triumph. This is my dad, Gerald, and my mom, Marjorie. Gerald, Marjorie. Not Frank, not Peggy, Gerald, Marjorie. I shook both their hands. I've heard so much about you too. I hadn't heard anything about them because they hadn't existed in this role until about a week ago. We sat, opened menus, and for the next 20 minutes I watched Rosalind perform with a fluidity that, under any other circumstances, would have genuinely impressed me. She laughed at Gerald's remarks half a second too fast. She referenced shared memories with Marjorie. Trips got mentioned, restaurants, family moments, and Marjorie followed along carefully, the way someone does when they're working from a script they've only half memorized. Gerald was smoother. He asked me questions about the business, made informed comments about the furniture restoration trade. Clearly he'd looked me up and generally carried himself like a man who'd done his homework and was determined to be convincing. Everyone at that table was acting. The whole table was a stage, and I sat there eating grilled salmon, being absolutely charming. So, Gerald, I said, setting my fork down with the relaxed calm of a man without a worry in the world. Rosalind's told me a great deal about you. You've clearly had a significant presence in her life. Gerald smiled. She's been like family to us. Like family. That's everything. It means so much to us, I said. I looked at Rosalind when I said it. She smiled back, radiant. Keep smiling, sweetheart. I'm going to be honest with the two of you, I continued, leaning in slightly, the way I do in negotiations when I want someone to feel like I'm letting them in on something. My family's Polish, old-fashioned Catholic. We take formal occasions seriously. My family would never forgive me if we didn't do this the right way. I paused. We'd love to host an engagement dinner next Saturday. Nothing extravagant. Family, good food, a toast. My parents just need to welcome the people who matter to Rosalind before we get to the altar. Gerald glanced at Marjorie. Half a second of silent calculation. We'd be honored, he said. Rosalind grabbed my hand under the table so fast I felt it in my shoulder. Perfect, I said. I smiled at her. She smiled back full, radiant, triumphant, the smile of a woman who believes she's already won. The trap was built. She just walked in smiling. If you've been with me a while, drop your comments below. While you're at it, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Over the next 6 days, I moved with quiet precision. Monday, I drove back to Butler. I called Frank from the driveway before I even knocked. He opened the door before I finished ringing. We sat at the same kitchen table, the same coffee. I told them about the lunch, about Gerald and Marjorie Whitfield, about the performance, about the engagement dinner I'd arranged. I told them I wanted them there. Peggy's hands went still around her coffee mug. Walt, we don't want to cause a scene. Peggy, I looked at her directly. My family is going to stand in a church and welcome whoever walks through those doors into our family. She deserves to know who's really standing there. I paused. And you've spent 2 years sending birthday cards that came back unopened. You deserve to be in that room. Not for drama, because you're her parents. And somebody has to say it out loud. Frank leaned over and covered Peggy's hand with his own. He looked at me. What time should we be there? Tuesday, I sat with my son and my brother-in-law Stash in Michael's office and laid it all out in detail. Michael listened, asked 2 precise questions, then said, I'll handle the restaurant. He picked up the phone, and that was the end of it. Stash's reaction required immediate containment. I want to say something to her at the door, he growled, narrowing his eyes. No, Stash. You don't say a single word until I stand up for the toast, I told him, putting both hands on his shoulders. I need you to do the hardest thing you've ever done. He looked at the ceiling, then at Michael, who was biting the inside of his cheek. Fine. Stash finally hissed. But I want a double portion of pierogi before anyone sits down, and I'm holding the door when we leave. I looked at him and nodded. That I can absolutely deliver. Every piece was in place. Old Warsaw, downtown, was my son's pick a restaurant that felt like a home, not a stage set. Private dining room in the back. White tablecloths, candles, warm lighting. Danuta personally handled the menu and added a small framed photo of my parents to the welcome table because, in her words, they needed to be there too. Frank and Peggy drove down from Butler Saturday morning and checked into a hotel in nearby Cranberry Township. Frank called me Thursday night to confirm. His voice was steady and careful, and at the end of the call, after we'd gone over the details, he said quietly, Walt, whatever happens tomorrow in that room, thank you for coming up to Butler, for knocking on that door. He paused. She chose well, even if she doesn't know it yet. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said, see you tomorrow, Frank. I pressed my suit Friday night. I climbed into bed next to Rosalind, who was already asleep, already dreaming of the version of tomorrow she'd imagined for herself. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about a man in a faded Steelers t-shirt watering a flower bed on Larkspur Lane, a birthday card sealed with a red stamp on the front, a kitchen table where 2 people had been quietly waiting 2 years for someone to finally show up. Someone was showing up tomorrow. So were they. You can build a lie as tall as you want, but the moment the right people walk through the door, all of it comes down. That Saturday morning in September, I woke up with a stillness that doesn't come from peace, it comes from certainty. I lay there a few minutes listening to Rosalind in the bathroom, the shower running, the hairdryer, the particular rhythm of a woman preparing for a performance she believes she's already won. And I thought about Frank Hart pressing his navy blazer in a hotel room in Cranberry Township, Peggy standing in front of a mirror trying to hold herself together. Two people who'd driven an hour down Route 8 for a dinner their own daughter had no idea they'd been invited to. Get up, Walt. Let's finish this. Rosalind took 3 hours to get ready. 3 hours. I sat in the living room watching the highlights of last night's Steelers game with the volume low and let her have every minute of it. She came out twice to ask my opinion. Once about earrings, once about shoes, and both times I told her she looked beautiful. Because she did. That was never the problem. The problem was everything hiding underneath the beauty. She wanted to leave early to check the venue setup. I told her to go ahead, that I had one quick call to make, and I'd meet her there. She kissed my cheek, grabbed her coat, and walked out the door with an expression like everything in her life was perfectly arranged. The second the door closed, I picked up the phone and called Frank. He answered on the first ring. "You doing okay?" I asked. "We're ready." His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who'd made peace with a decision. "Peggy's dressed. We're ready. Good. When I text you, you come in. Doesn't matter what's happening at that table. You just walk in and stand there. You don't have to say one word." A pause. "Frank." "Yeah. She's going to see you the second that door opens." "I know. I just want you to be ready for it too, Walt." His voice stopped me for a second. "I've been getting ready for 2 years. I've been ready since the night she blocked us. I've been ready every birthday of Peggy's when the phone didn't ring." Another pause, shorter. "We'll be there." I held the phone a second after he hung up. Then I put on my jacket, felt for the ring in my inside pocket, and left. Old Warsaw on a Saturday night is exactly what it should be: warm, welcoming, the smell of dill and butter greeting you at the door like an old friend. But the private dining room in the back runs on a different frequency. Quieter, deliberate, white linens, low light, round tables arranged so everyone can see each other. My sister had been there since 4 in the afternoon. When I walked in at 6:30, she was adjusting the centerpiece flowers with the focused energy of a woman who understands that the details of a room tell people how seriously you're taking it. She looked up when I came in and studied my face the way she has since I was old enough to have something to hide. "You okay?" "I'm fine, Danusha." "You sure?" "I'm sure." She crossed the room and put both hands on my face, looked at me a long moment. "Your father," she said quietly, "used to say the truth always finds the most comfortable seat in the room, even when nobody invited it in." She straightened my collar. "Let it sit tonight." I nearly lost it right there. Nearly. Michael stood near the bar talking to our cousin's husband, already in his dark gray suit, completely composed. He nodded at me once when I walked over. That nod said everything's ready, the room is set, do what you need to do. Stash sat at a side table with a full plate of pierogi and the focused expression of a man honoring a solemn obligation. He caught my eye, pointed at his plate, then pointed at me. His version of, "I held up my end." "Don't forget yours." I almost smiled. They arrived at 7. I heard Rosalind's laugh in the hallway before the door even opened, that particular social laugh, half a step higher than her real one, the one she uses when she wants a room to feel like a party before she's even walked into it. She came in first. Navy dress, hair done perfectly, every detail flawless. Gerald Whitfield followed. Silver hair, expensive suit, moving with the natural authority of a man who'd never once doubted his right to be wherever he was. Marjorie beside him, elegant, composed, pearls at her collarbone. Rosalind moved through that room like she owned it. She kissed Danuta on both cheeks, shook Michael's hand with both of hers, laughed at something Marjorie said near the drink table and touched her arm warmly. She was magnificent. Genuinely, frighteningly magnificent. When she reached my side, she looped her arm through mine and leaned in. "This is perfect," she whispered. "Your family is incredible. This is everything I wanted." "I know," I said. "That's why I did it." She heard a compliment. I meant something else entirely. We sat. The food came: roasted duck, stuffed cabbage, a feast my sister had designed herself, fresh bread in a basket wrapped in cloth. The table filled with the warm noise of a real family dinner. Gerald was gracious and attentive, asking my son about the business with what looked like genuine interest. Marjorie complimented Danuta on the restaurant choice, and Danuta accepted the compliment graciously, while privately thinking things I'll never fully understand. Rosalind was radiant, relaxed, victorious. I ate. I laughed at the right moments. I refilled glasses, asked questions, and to anyone watching, I was a completely relaxed man enjoying a family dinner. My phone sat face down in my jacket pocket. I had a text to send. I was waiting for the right moment. That moment came at 7:48, in the brief pause between the main course and whatever was supposed to come next. The table was warm, the wine was flowing, and Rosalind was laughing hard at something Gerald had said. I took out my phone and typed one word to Frank. Then I stood and tapped a knife against a glass, that clean, clear sound that tells a room, stop, listen. The table went still. Rosalind looked at me with that full, radiant smile. The smile of a woman who thinks the next 60 seconds are going to be a toast about how much he loves her. I let the silence stretch a beat longer than felt comfortable. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. My voice was calm, even. The way my father used to talk when something really mattered in our family. A dinner like this isn't just a nice evening. It's a statement. It's us saying, these people are real. These people matter. We don't say that lightly. I looked slowly around the table. My father taught me that the people you invite into a moment reveal exactly who you are. I paused. So, I want to make sure that tonight we have the right people at this table. I looked at Tony, the restaurant manager, standing near the back wall. He'd been briefed. He knew his cue. He walked to the side door and opened it, and in walked Frank and Peggy Hart. Frank in his navy blazer, the one that didn't quite fit the way it used to, the kind you could tell he'd had for years and saved for occasions that mattered. Peggy in a burgundy dress, a small purse held tight in both hands, chin up, moving with the quiet dignity of a woman who'd decided she was not going to fall apart in public no matter what happened next. They crossed the threshold into the silence of the room, and Rosalind saw them. I was watching her face. I'd positioned myself specifically to watch her face. The color drained like a tide, pulling out fast, complete, total, her lips parted. Her hand, the one holding her wine glass, went completely still. The glass tilted. I reached over without looking at her and steadied it, set it down gently on the linen. She turned to me. Her eyes ran the fast calculation of someone searching for the story that might save her. I watched it happen in real time. The search for an exit, an angle, some version of this she could still control. Walt. Her voice came out thin, almost nothing. I went to Butler, I said quietly, not loudly, not performing for the room. I talked to them 3 weeks ago. I drove up Route 8 on a Saturday morning because I told myself, maybe I can fix this for her. Maybe I can give her back her family as a wedding gift. I let that land. I found a man watering his garden on Larkspur Lane in a Steelers t-shirt. I told him my name, and he dropped the garden hose. The room had gone tense. Rosalind, your father worked for the Postal Service for 32 years. Your mother was a school secretary for most of your childhood. They put you through Penn State, and they did it without you owing a single dollar, because they wanted you to have everything. My voice stayed steady, level. They offered you $12,000 from their retirement fund, and you told them if they couldn't finance your life, they didn't exist in it. She opened her mouth. You don't understand everything that happened when I sat in their kitchen, I said quietly, like a door closing. I saw your school photos on the refrigerator. I held the birthday card you mailed to our address, unopened. And while I sat there, you texted me telling me your parents had apologized and wanted to meet me for lunch. I turned to Gerald and Marjorie Whitfield. Marjorie had both hands flat on the table in front of her, her face completely pale. Gerald had gone entirely still. Gerald, Marjorie, I said, my voice shifting to something quiet and respectful. I know exactly what she told you. She told you my family was deeply prejudiced, that her biological parents had passed away years ago, and she asked you to act as her honorary family mentors, so she wouldn't have to face a traditional Polish wedding alone. She used your kindness and your standing as a weapon to fill 2 empty seats on a stage. I gestured toward Frank and Peggy, standing near the door. But those are her real parents. Marjorie looked at Rosalind, a long, slow look that needed no words, because words wouldn't have been enough anyway. Then, she looked at Frank and Peggy, and something crossed her face that was worse than anger. It was recognition, the specific recognition of a woman who just understood that the person she thought she knew didn't exist. Gerald said nothing. He folded his napkin, set it on the table, the gesture of a man leaving who's decided there's nothing left worth saying. I turned back to Rosalind one last time. She'd stopped looking for the exit. There wasn't one, and she knew it. She just looked at me, eyes bright, jaw tight. The entire architecture of everything she'd built reflected back at her in every face in that room. I grew up watching my father treat people, every person, like they mattered. The man who parks the car, the woman who cleans the office, the retired mailman from Butler who gave everything and was told it wasn't enough. I reached into my jacket pocket. That's the measure I was raised with. Not the address, not the job title, not the clothes. I looked at her. By that measure, I don't know who you are. I took the ring out of my pocket. I set it down on the white linen tablecloth in front of her. Not thrown, not dramatic. Just placed. Quietly. The way you set something down when you've been carrying it too long and you're finally ready to let it go for good. Then I picked up the floral centerpiece at the middle of our table. White flowers. Simple. My sister's choice. And I crossed the room to where Peggy Hart was standing. She was fighting it. You could see the effort in her jaw, her shoulders, the careful, short way she was breathing, the way people breathe when they're holding something enormous and can't afford to let it fall in public. I held out the flowers. She looked at them, looked at me, and then finally let go completely. Not a scream, a whisper, the kind that comes after 2 years of accumulated grief finally finding somewhere to land. Frank wrapped his arm around her before she could make the first sound. His jaw was tight, his eyes wet, his chin steady. He pulled her close and looked at me over her head. Then he did something I didn't expect. He stepped forward. One step, Peggy still tucked under his arm, and he extended his free hand. I shook it. He gripped it hard, the grip of a man saying something his voice still couldn't fully manage. I held it a moment. Then I stepped back. My son was beside me. I don't know exactly when he'd moved. Michael Kowalczyk shows up when it matters. That's simply what he does. He looked at Frank Hart for a moment. Then he stepped forward and extended his hand. I'm Michael, he said. I should have met you a long time ago. I'm sorry. Frank shook his hand and swallowed once. Frank, a breath. Thank you for raising a man like that. My son glanced at me sideways. Just for a second, just long enough. In 38 years, I'd never seen him look that proud. My sister didn't shake Peggy's hand. She pulled her into a full embrace, both arms, immediate, unconditional, the way Polish mothers hold whoever needs holding. Peggy clung to her. The flowers were still in her hands. We walked out together, Danuta and the Harts, my sister's arm looped through Peggy's. Michael and Frank walked side by side with the quiet ease of two men who'd just recognized something rare in each other. My nephew held doors. Stash brought up the rear. He stopped at the front entrance, turned around once. I looked back too. Rosalind was sitting at the center of that table in her perfect dress, in her perfectly constructed life, the ring resting on the linen in front of her, the centerpiece gone. Gerald and Marjorie Whitfield stood at the back of the room. Marjorie already had her coat on. Gerald had a hand on her back, and neither one looked at Rosalind as they walked toward the exit. Her friends, the social circle she'd built, the one she'd performed for, the one her entire second identity had been constructed around, sat in their chairs with the particular discomfort of people who'd just witnessed something they couldn't unsee and didn't know what to do with their hands. Nobody went to her. Nobody pulled her aside. Nobody offered a version of events that made her look better. Nobody played the part she needed, because there were no more parts left to play. The whole cast had left. She just sat there, finally, irreversibly, seen. Stash stared at her a long moment, then shook his head once, slowly, almost sadly, and let the door close behind him. Outside on the sidewalk, in the clean September air, downtown Pittsburgh moved around us like it had no idea what had just happened inside that restaurant. I stood next to my son and took a deep breath. He put his hand on the back of my neck, something he's done since he was a boy. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, Grandpa would have done the same thing. That was it. That was all he said. Across the sidewalk, Frank Hart looked out at the Pittsburgh skyline, with Peggy tucked under his arm, the white flowers still in her hands. Both of them breathing in the same clean September air, like people who'd just gotten back something they'd stopped hoping to see again. Frank caught me looking. He nodded once, not a thank you, something there wasn't a word for. I nodded back. Some deals you close for profit. Some you close because there's no version of yourself you can live with by walking away from the table. That night, I closed the most important deal of my life, and I didn't make a single dollar. Some people lie to erase the ones who loved them. She built an entire life on top of that eraser. And one Saturday night in September, in a private dining room at Old Warsaw in downtown Pittsburgh, every single floor of it came down. If this story meant something to you tonight, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I'll see you in the next one, my friend.